My name is Paul Gunther. I'm president of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Classical America. The Metropolitan Museum of Art decided a long time ago to part with this collection either through deaccession or long-term loan. In the end, the final decision is a formal deaccessioning. Therefore, the Institute will have permanent stewardship of this collection.
The Met assembled this immense collection of casts, and it's huge, and it covers everything from Egyptian antiquity, Greek antiquity, Roman antiquity, Byzantine period, the medieval period, the Renaissance, the Baroque, the 19th century, the 18th century. You know, it's like the entire range of history. This collection is almost priceless for all sorts of reasons. One of which is that some of the things that we're getting, like the casts from the Parthenon, which were taken from the Elgin marbles and so on, you can't get anymore. I mean, they're not casting anymore from the Elgin marbles. Casts from buildings that are still exposed to the weather. The ones from the Met were made in the 19th century. If you went to cast them again today, the building's degraded, far more than it was at that point. So in fact, the cast in some cases is better than the original building. Of course, the original part of the Metropolitan Museum was the Great Hall and the rooms immediately around it. That hall used to be filled with sculpture casts as well as the dedicated room beyond it, so that when you arrived into the Metropolitan Museum, instead of seeing all the usual sort of visitor stuff that you see today, you would have been surrounded by great sculptures, great casts of architectural fragments and so on. And that's really where it got started.
This is the catalog of the collection of casts of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I think the number, if I'm right, was that they had over 2,000. The casts were at the Metropolitan for a definite reason, and that was for the training of the artist. And this was true of schools of art across the country. The most famous one was probably at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, because they had what they called the Salle des Plâtres, which was in a great hall of the school, and your artist was always trained to draw from the cast before he turned to draw the human figure. It was the phrase for it was called drawing the antique.
These are two casts of the metopes from the Parthenon, which are these astonishing sculptural compositions on their own. And the metopes are those square panels that sit between the triglyphs on the main frieze of the Parthenon, all the way around the building. And they of course depict this amazing battles between men and centaurs, right? So you get these centaur figures here, this horse-man figure fighting this man, and they're astonishingly dynamic compositions, and each one done by a different sculptor, and they all play out the theme of how do you create a sculptural composition inside a square box, basically, right? Because you've got this square frame to fit these things into, and each one is different and quite astonishing.
In choosing the various casts, there weren't really any defining criteria. We went through them all. We chose some just because they were beautiful. We chose some because they might work as good teaching tools for sketching and drawing in the classroom. The casts are in extraordinary condition considering their age. They are dirty, they're in fact very dirty, but all we really need to do to them is clean them off. We would like to keep a patina of dust on them to give them depth, that gives them more interest in terms of sketching and drawing, and also emphasizes their history, that they're historical records.
Well, in the past, the casts were used to literally just train your hand and your eye to draw, and to learn the quality of an object in light and shadow. There is no better training for a designer or an architect than that, I mean, quite literally. And of course, if you're looking, the better the object is that you're looking at, the better you're training your eye. That was the point of these collections, that they collected what was collectively thought of as the great monuments, the things that had really stood the test of time, and put them in front of students. And I think that was the primary goal in doing it. And they literally stood students in front of these things for hours at a time, day after day after day, year after year after year, drawing these things. One of the beauties of the collection is the way in which they have scale models of buildings, whole buildings, with then pieces of the full-size sculpture cast from it next to it, so that as an architecture student or an art student, you could see the thing in its context, but you could also study the thing up close. This is a little model of the Ara Pacis, which is this great monument that was built to commemorate the Augustan peace. And it's one of the great pieces of Augustan sculpture, I guess is the best way to put it. And it has these amazing friezes. You can see them along the side showing the parade of all the senators and electors and so on. And then this extraordinary decorative sculpting. That epitomizes this collection. The level of skill that went into making that, it would be hard-pressed to find anybody today who could make a model like that.
The art of mold making and cast making is a lost art, and nobody knows that much about it. But when you really look at them, the level of detail and intricacy is really amazing. At the turn of the century, all the museums in the country that had cast collections, or the large institutions like the Metropolitan or the MFA or the Institute in Chicago, had mold making workshops, and there was a whole force of craftsmen who created these casts that have more or less disappeared. So it's really a lost art coming to light.
There were studios dedicated to doing this, associated with most of the major museums around the world. These guys were real artists. I mean, it's not as if they were just cranking out casts out of a rubber mold or something. I mean, it takes a great deal of technical knowledge to put them together. They're made out of many pieces because you can't cast these complex objects out of a single piece. And they had to be sculptors too, really, because they had to make these casts and then, finish them properly and fit them together so they looked like a coherent whole and not like a bunch of joined together jigsaw puzzle pieces. And so there was a whole, sort of craft of this, really, I guess you could say, of people who did this. These are pieces of the Colleoni Monument in Venice, which is that amazing equestrian monument outside San Zipolo. It's one of the great equestrian statues of all time. You can see, this amazing horse's head. So we took it, I suppose on one hand, sort of ambitiously thinking we might try and reassemble the whole thing, although I think it's probably 30 feet high or something like that. But even if we don't, to have a horse's head like that for students to draw from is really, it's amazing. I think the cast collection is critical for the ICA. After all, the whole institute got started with me seeing the students drawing from casts at the New York Academy of Art. And that's something that not only did art students used to do, but architecture students. And it's the way every architect used to be trained to become an architect, was to look carefully at beautiful architectural objects and learn to draw them.
The Metropolitan has been loaning portions of their cast collection for years to various institutions throughout the country, and the ICA&CA and the Metropolitan sort of found each other at the right moment.
So it's central to the whole mission, really. It's as central as anything else that we do.
Our move here was perfect timing for receiving this gift from the Metropolitan Museum. We finally had a facility where we could park them and use them on a day-to-day basis.
In the Institute Classical Architecture in Classical America, it's going back to basic essentials. It's learning what they call the grammar of ornament, really. That's basically what it is.
I think it's exciting to just uncover these great pieces of history. They're amazing records, and that not very many people know about.
I always say to people the thing that bothers me most about 20th century architecture, and I was making this comparison the other day between Frank Lloyd Wright and Michelangelo, is that Frank Lloyd Wright did and would say that his achievement was individual, right? That it was all about him, It was like his mom made him a great architect and he became the world's greatest architect. Michelangelo used to say that the reason that he saw so far is because he stood on the shoulders of giants, which meant that his achievement was accomplished because of all the other great artists who both were his contemporaries and had gone before him. And I think there's a giant difference between those two things. And I think our camp is that whatever we do, you can only do because of all the other people who are doing it with you.